Teresa, welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining me here today. Today's video, a little bit different. I've got my gel plates here. I'm going to be talking about gel plates. I'm not going to be doing some printing today, but today's video is more about answering some of the regular comments and questions that I get about general sort of looking after and care of your gel plate. Now, if you own a gel plate, they are easy, super easy to look after and keep in good condition. But I know some people that they have concerns, they have questions, and I do get asked, what's that you're using there to clean your plate, or why are you doing that? What should I do? So I thought, let's just put together a quick video with the experience, my tips and advice, things that have worked for me on how I look after my plates and how I keep my plates in good condition. Now, a couple of my plates, the Jelly Arts brand ones, which I've got a couple here. I think I've got another one somewhere that I haven't pulled out. I've had for a number of years now, probably 4 or 5 years, used them an awful lot, still in tip-top condition. The gel press ones, I've got a couple here again. I've got another one somewhere else. These are newer, I've bought them this year. But care of these exactly the same as with the Jelly Arts brand. I will say now, the tips and advice I'm giving you today are for commercially bought plates. I've never made my own using a recipe, so I can't vouch for how to care for a homemade gel plate. Obviously, the manufactured plates have different ingredients. They're made up in a different way to the homemade ones. So please, if you've made your own plate, if you've followed a recipe that maybe you've found on a website or through watching a video, go back to the source of where you had that recipe from for tips on how to care for that plate. I can't say that you would have to look after that in the same way. I don't know. So basically, the tips that I have today are sort of going to fall into a couple of categories, and I'm going to begin with storage. As you can see, every one of these plates that I've bought has come in a plastic clamshell package. And when you originally get it and you open up the clamshell, your gel plate will be stored between 2 sheets of Mylar, this clear plastic material. And the first thing that I always do when I use my plate for the first time and take the Mylar off is to replace that with some paper. And I don't ever store it back between these 2 plates. When it comes to you like this, it is perfectly attached between this Mylar. There are no air bubbles in there. It's keeping that surface smooth and clean. When you peel that off yourself and go to put it back, it is very easy to trap an air bubble in there. And if you trap an air bubble in there, it will leave an indentation in the plate. When you next come to use that plate, that will show up in your print. Now, if it so happens that you've already got air bubbles on the surface of your plate, you can, by leaving your plate out, hope to let those air bubbles settle and sort of disappear. But I've found the best way, dispose of this Mylar or use it in a different crafting project and replace it with paper. Now, best paper to do this is just, your basic everyday printer, copier paper. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just some paper. Cut it to size. I mean, on these little ones here, this is actually from a dotted sketchbook. I hadn't got any printer paper to hand, but I just put my plate down on one piece of paper, then pop another piece of paper on the other side, and I store that back inside the original clamshell. Now, the paper prevents those air bubbles from forming. Paper has got a little bit of absorbency, so if any of the natural oils that are in the plate leach out, they get absorbed into that paper, and it keeps the plate in good condition. By then storing that back inside the clamshell, you're giving the plate a little bit of protection from sort of bumps and knocks and things like that. Obviously, the gel plates being a soft surface, if you were to store this next to something with a sharp corner, you don't want it to create an indentation. Once that happens, you know, you're going to struggle to get that back out and get back to a flat printing surface. So every one of these that I've used, this one here, I've got some graph paper. Again, I haven't got some printer paper to hand, so my plate's just between two pieces of graph paper. But this one, just printer paper. You can see how old this one is. It's getting a bit discoloured. This one, just plain printer paper. This one, again, printer paper. And then store them in the clamshells. And I store the clamshells flat like this. You could store them vertically, stand them up like that. That would be absolutely fine. But just watch that you've got nothing super heavy that's going to press down and cause anything to dig into the plate, or anything sharp pressing up against it that could dig into it. So that's my advice for storage. Ditch the Mylar, replace with paper, put back in the clamshell. The next tips that I've got would be more to do with cleaning your plate, cleaning the surface of your plate. Now, as you could see from that one that I showed you there that I haven't used before, brand new gel plate, super clean, super transparent, crystal clear. Take a look at one of these that I've been using for, say, 5 years now. And it's discoloured, it's a bit cloudy, it's got bits of paint around the edge here, none of which matter. The cloudiness occurs naturally. As I say, there are oils inside the gel plate, and I think they sort of come up to the surface and cause a cloudiness. It doesn't cause any problems whatsoever. It doesn't affect the performance, so don't worry if you do see any cloudiness on your plate. The staining is caused by me using different types of products on the plate. The least invasive things that you use, things like acrylic paint which just sit on the surface, tend not to cause much in the way of staining. But over the years I've used acrylic paint, paint markers, dye-based inks, pigment-based inks, alcohol inks, alcohol markers, pan pastels, watercolour paints, water-soluble crayons. I've used all sorts of products, and certain things, especially things like the alcohol inks and the pan pastels, can cause staining to sort of soak into the plate itself. Now, again, this does not affect the performance. It doesn't affect the ability to print. And as long as when you've cleaned your plate, you've cleaned it so that there's no more ink or pastel or whatever coming off when you clean, the staining that is actually trapped within the plate, it's not going to transfer and it's not going to cause any problem with future prints. So again, don't worry about the staining. It doesn't affect the performance, but do bear that in mind. If it's something that's going to bother you, be particular about what products that you use on your plate, and maybe just stick to something like acrylic paint, which is less likely to cause staining. But for the most part, when I've been painting, using paint on my gel plate, the first thing that you would see me do is I'll get some water in a spray and lightly spray some water on, and then take a piece of paper towel and wipe it over the surface, and that will remove the majority of any paint that's left there. You might see me do it just the once, I might have to do it a couple of times. But generally speaking, that's all I need to do to clean the plate ready for the next print. Some of you choose to leave paint on there and keep working through because, you know, the leftover bits cause unexpected results, and that's just fine. But I would always recommend when you've finished your session, when you're ready to put this plate away, clean it off as best you can. Obviously, as you can see, mine's not perfect. Around the edges, I've still got bits and little bits at the corners and things like that, and I don't mind that, but the majority of the surface of my plate is clean, just for the sake that the next time I get it out, I'm ready to go. I haven't got to worry about, do I need to clean something off? It's all ready to go. So I would always suggest that. Make sure you've cleaned it with some water, with some paper towel when you've finished. Another option, if you've got a smallish plate like this, one that's easy to handle, just take it to the sink, wash it with some soap and water, just, you know, use your fingers. Don't scrub at it with anything. You don't want to damage the surface. Never use anything sharp or scratchy on it, because if you do happen to scratch the surface, that scratch is going to stay there. It's permanent. It's not going to go away. So I tend to get a little bit of liquid soap sometimes, just rub it over the surface under a warm tap or a cold tap, nothing too hot. Get the surface paint off, pat it dry with some paper towel and pop the plate between the paper again and put away. Now if you're using something that can stain, so for example the alcohol inks, the pan pastels, some of the dye-based inks that can cause a little bit more staining, maybe when you've used the water a couple of times and you've still got colour coming off, next thing I would suggest trying is some baby oil. And this, the labels come off it because I think oil's sort of dripped on it, but this just cheap supermarket, go down the baby aisle where the nappies and things like that are, there'll be a bottle of baby oil. And this is absolutely excellent. I pop a couple of drops onto the plate, get the paper towel, wipe it over the surface. That'll tend to pull up any staining that's in there. You might want to repeat that once or twice until it starts coming away clear. Then I generally put a little spritz of water because I don't want to leave a film of oil on the surface. I'll wipe it over like that and then once again pop the plate between my pieces of paper and store it. So not only does the mineral oil do a really good job at pulling out that extra colour that might be staining in the surface of the plate, it also helps keep it in condition because there is mineral oil within the makeup of these commercial plates. And by popping a little bit of it back in on a regular basis, I've found that that helps keep it working in a really good way. I get better prints. I can't tell you why, I don't know the chemistry of why it is, but I tend to notice if I haven't popped some mineral oil on my plate for a while, I can tell that the quality of my print starts to go down a little bit. Sometimes the paint doesn't release as well as I want, sometimes the paint starts beading up in random places, I don't get an even coverage. So I've found that if, you know, before I pop my plate away, if I just give it a wipe over with some oil, it seems to keep it in good condition and I'm getting good, consistent quality prints each time. One tip, if you have started to get a lot of build-up, and a lot of people do get this sort of thicker build-up round the edges and in the corners here, if when you've been cleaning, if you haven't been quite wiping to the edge, you can just take some clear sticky tape, packing tape, and if you just press it onto the surface where that dried on paint is, you'll find that you can remove layers of paint quite easily. It does pull it off. As long as this paint is dry, this packing tape tip will help pull off a lot of this loose paint, like so. Then some people do go on to use that if you've covered it and press it down and use it in your mixed media if you want to. But as you can see there, it's pulled off some of that paint quite well. So that's another tip just to bear in mind. If you've got some areas where it's a little bit thicker and encrusted and you found that the cleaning with the water or the baby oil's not moving it, try just lifting some of it with the packing tape and then you might be able to go back in with the water or baby oil after and get rid of it. Another tip for dried on paint would be to use a hand sanitizer, something like this, something that I'm sure there are very few people in the world at the moment that don't have a bottle of hand sanitizer. Because it has a percentage of alcohol in it, it's very good for loosening paint and inks and things like that. So you could pop a little bit of this onto the surface of your plate. I would suggest just using your fingers to rub it in. Take the paper towel, wipe it off, but then make sure to clean the surface of your plate afterwards. As you can see there, that's actually pulling out a little bit of staining. Make sure you've cleaned any residual gel off your plate with some water. You can use soap and water if you want to. And then I would again finish with a little bit of the oil, just because You wouldn't want the alcohol that's in the hand sanitizer to dry out the plate any. It's not going to damage your plate at all by wiping it over there, but obviously, again, just keeping this plate in a good condition. Let's just replace some of that oil back into the plate again afterwards. The last thing that I really want to mention is more just some things to avoid. Avoid excessive heat. I know it's tempting sometimes if you're doing multi-layer prints and you're waiting for layers of paint to dry, don't be tempted to speed that up using a heat tool or something like that. The plates themselves are flammable, but before it's going to burst into flame, you're going to damage the surface if you point a heat tool at it. So avoid doing that. Just, have a little patience and let things dry naturally if you need them to dry. As I said before, don't use any sharp tools or implements. When using your mark making tools, be aware what you're using. Don't use a sharp pointy metal tool to make lines. Use something with a plastic tip or a rounded tip. Be aware of anything that you're using to impress on the surface to make a pattern. Make sure that you're not going to leave any bits on there that when you come to store your plate, you wouldn't want there to be any noticeable debris on this plate when you come to store it, because again, if it sort of pushes into the surface, it can damage the surface. I would avoid using paints that contain large particles of glitter. You'll be fine with things like pearlescent paints and some paints that have a very fine sort of shimmery glitter. But there are certain brands of paint that have large glittery particles. And because those particles can be quite sharp, I would, again, be wary of using them. You could find that you've got particles left on the surface, and when you come to try and wipe and clean your surface, that they could scratch the surface. So just be aware of that. But most of all, at the end of the day, use your plates, have fun with your plates, experiment with different media on there. I haven't come across anything that I've been afraid to try. Any of my paints, my inks that I have in my stash for all the crafting that I do, I have used on the plate, and they have all created interesting and beautiful prints, different effects. As I say, certain things may take a little more cleaning to get them off. Certain products might leave some residual staining, but none of them have damaged the plate. None of them have affected the performance of the plate. It's merely cosmetic when you get the staining. Just look after your plate with these simple basic rules, and it should last you for years. So I hope that today's video, albeit not as exciting as watching me do something creative, I hope it's answered some of those questions. I'm glad now that I have all those tips and bits of advice in one place that I can direct people to. And I hope that you continue to enjoy creating fun and interesting prints using your own gel plates. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I shall see you again soon. But for now, that's all. Bye.